Hello, folks. My name's Sam Hansen. I'm with Discus of the Southwest. I've been keeping fish or keeping discus for over 20 years, and I get asked this question all the time. How in the world do I get my discus to eat anything at all sometimes, or to eat multiple different kinds of foods? Um, I have found that by keeping the food suspended in the water column in front of the fish is the most effective way to present food to them. As you can see, I just dropped some food in here. The food, instead of just sinking down to the bottom and sitting on the bottom or floating around the top of the water, it goes down. It will hit kind of the bottom of the water, and as the fish are attacking it and breaking it up in little spots, I've got my return pumps pushing water across the top of the tank towards the front of the tank, and the food and the water will go across, hit the front of the tank, and then go down, and then go back towards the back of the tank. I'm trying to zoom in and get some food, figure out how close I need to get to be able to see the food. Sorry about that, zooming in and out. But then the food will travel across the bottom of the tank towards the back of the tank, and then I've got these little air stones that help lift the water and food particles back up towards the top of the tank, and then it just starts going in a cycle over and over again. So the food particles, along with the water, will go across the top of the tank, hit the front, go down the front of the tank, hit the bottom, and then go back towards the back of the tank, across the bottom. You can see some of those food particles at the bottom there going back across the bottom. And then they're lifted, sorry about that, um, back up towards the top of the water to the surface, and then back across again where it just keeps going over and over and over again, tumbling the food in the center of the water column. Now these fish have already pretty much full now because they attacked the food, and there's still bits of food kind of floating around in the water column. Fish are pretty well have been fed at this point. I have put a lot of extra food in this tank just for this demonstration, a lot more than I normally do. So they're pretty well full now. But as you can see, even as that food kind of goes by in front of their faces, they will reach out and take another nip at it, even though they are full, and in actuality that their feeding would be done over with on a normal basis. But anyway, for the part of the, I don't recommend overfeeding your fish, but for the aspect of this demonstration, I wanted to make sure there's enough food in there while we're talking about it. You don't want to see my face. Just watch the fish as they're eating their food and everything, and they'll fight a little bit. But keeping food presented to them in where it's not just floating across the top of the tank, or it's not just hanging around the bottom, just sinking down to the bottom, keeping it moving around in front of them will entice them to either eat for the first time or to try a new food. I always try to get my discus to eat at least 4 or 5 different kinds of foods. I buy these guys as small little 2-inch fish. I grow them out, raise them up, and then I sell them. I mean, that's what I do. So whenever I sell a fish to somebody, I don't want to sell them a fish that only eat one kind of food. And I hear it over and over again. I'll be talking to a customer that's got or has a discus that they bought from someplace else, and they'll say, my fish just eats one thing and that's it. Or I bought the fish and he won't eat. I'll address another part of not eating in a minute, but right now just focusing on getting them to eating new types of foods. It's very effective if you have a food that they will eat and they readily go after, mixing a new food with that food. So they're being introduced to a new food along with food they already recognize as food. And again, as long as it's floating around in this kind of pattern, it can only help to entice them to take a first bite of that new food. Again, this is just a different way. I'd love to hear other people's opinions on how to entice discus to eat or eat new foods. This is just something I've come up with over the years. At first, when I first got discus, I'm like everybody else. I had a hard time getting to eat certain things, and new food would just freak them out. They'd just stare at it because it would just sit at the bottom of the tank or float around on the top of the tank until I got skimmed off. Not doing any much good. So introducing food in this manner keeps it in front of their faces, keeps it out to them until it is eventually skimmed off at the top with my overflow box. But it just keeps it in front of them where they have more opportunities to try to take a bite at it. In a new food presented in this way, along with food that they readily take and readily go after, um, man, it's just a great way to do it. Again, if you have any other ideas or don't like this, just, by all means, I'll hear anybody's comments. I've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years, and it works great as far as just keeping the water flow. I got the idea of doing this kind of water flow from actually having a saltwater tank and keeping food suspended in there for coral and everything. Kind of thought, well, if you do that, maybe you can do it with freshwater, and it works really great. And I mean, it's made my job a lot easier to get them to try and eat new foods. Now, what do I feed my discus? This is a beef heart blend that I make myself. It's beef heart, shrimp, and tilapia mixed together with some spirulina. And I've never had a fish. In fact, when I first get fish in, this is the first meal they'll ever have. So I've never had a discus ever refuse this food. Um, I mean, ever. They've always gone after it. Or initially, I was able to get them to eat this food. I've never had an instance where I haven't ever been able to get them to eat this kind of food. So I make my own little blend there. I also feed them tetracolor tropical granules. I also feed them a New Life Spectrum, both the tropical blend, and I also feed the marine fish blend to them as well. I also found that the Sea Kim um, discus flakes are really good, and sometimes I will use some seaweed type of blended flakes as well. But they really like the Sea Kim flakes as far as a flake food. I also feed them tubifix worms, feed them sparingly some bloodworms. Um, I've just found that if I do use bloodworms, though, I use the kind that comes in a big plate because it's got a lot less water in it than the cubes. I also like to use a Hikari because I think they really do clean their bloodworms real well, so you don't have any kind of. I've never had any trouble get, getting my fish sick eating those things. Sorry if you can hear the trash truck outside. I just drove by. Um, so to wrap it up, I feed my discus at least 4 or 5 different kinds of foods. I mix, if I'm introducing a new food, mix it in with a food that they readily accept. Put it in however you put it in the tank. Keep it kind of in that middle part of that water column. Great way to do it. So it doesn't just float around the top or sink straight to the bottom. Also, one thing I do get phone calls all the time with, people call me panicking saying that they fed their discus something and it's got bloat, or they actually just call up and say, "Hey, my discus has bloat. What can I do about it?" It's usually readily fixed by just putting some Epsom salt in the water and clearing that up. It will cause it's a little bit of a laxative effect. It'll help clear a blockage there. But um, almost always when I ask a customer or whoever's calling me, "What did you feed the discus before?" Well, it's almost always, I guess right now at this time, it's 100% of the time it was some sort of a hard food, either a pellet or a flake or tubifix worm or something like that. Gave their discus bloat. Now, I don't need 100 phone calls or don't teach everybody in the world saying, "Well, I feed my discus hard foods all the time." I never get that. That's not the point here. It just seems like every person I've talked to, they fed their discus something hard. It's irritated their stomach lining, and it irritates their intestinal lining. Those things get inflamed a little bit, and it can cause a blockage. It's not 100%. It's not always going to, but it will. At least in my experience, if you have a blockage, it's almost always pointed back towards that. Just soak your food first. Every hard food that I introduce to my fish, even fish that I've had for 4 or 5 years or 2 or 3 years, the I soak my hard foods first. I never not soak it, and I don't have bloat issues. Look at my discus; they're all nice, thick, heavy discus. They're all super healthy. Obviously, what I feed them works. Um, but if you do feed a hard food, I do highly recommend soaking it first. And lots of times it'll also trigger a discus to go ahead and try new food because it's sometimes if they swim over and grab a new food, if it's kind of hard, seems like a discus are really bad about this. If it's if they don't like the texture of it, texture really seems to be a key trigger on these guys. They don't like the texture, they just spit it out without even trying to eat it. So if it's softer, a little more malleable in their mouth, they're more likely to take a bite of it and eat it, and keep eating it over and over again. So feed your discus. If you feed them in this way, or if you can figure out a way to keep the food circulating in the middle of the tank, you'll have a lot more success with feeding your discus newer food. Now, one other thing I mentioned earlier, I have had people call me in kind of a panic. They didn't get discus from me; they got them from somebody else, and they said my discus just won't eat. I've had it for a few days now, and it won't eat. Or I get a phone call and I'll ask them. I say, how long have you had your discus? And they said, well, I just got it in today. Well, it's a new fish and a new tank and a new environment, trying to get used to everything. I wouldn't even expect them to eat on the first day. In fact, if I get a new discus in um, that I've imported in, I don't feed them. I don't even try to feed them for at least 24, probably 48 hours. But I never offer them food any closer than 24 hours. If I get a discus shipment in on like a Thursday, I won't. I'll definitely not feed them anything on Friday. They may not see any kind of food offered to them until maybe a Saturday night or a Sunday morning. Is the first time I try to introduce them to food. It's a fish that you just got to have. It's trying to, I guess, acclimate to its new environment. Um, don't expect them to just be hitting the food extra hard. Just give them a couple of days or a day, at least a day, to kind of get used to the new environment. Then present them to whoever you got them from. Ask them what their favorite food was. Present them with that favorite food, and I think you'll have a lot more success. I've had people call me up and say that they've had discus for over a week and they still aren't eating, and they're trying to introduce a brand new food that they've never seen before. I've just asked them where they got their fish. I'll call that guy up and ask them, hey, what did you feed your discus before? And you know, call the customer back up, tell them what to feed them, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, hey, they're eating good. So try to find out what the other person has fed them before you got them. All right, I'm kind of rambling on here, talking a little longer than you probably want to sit here and watch fish swim around, but trying to get your fish to eat something new, mix it in with your old food, make sure it's nice and soft so the texture is good, and just have a great time with your discus. They will eat. They will. They're just not hungry enough or aren't settled in enough if they're not eating. Anyway, this is Sam Hansen with Discus of the Southwest. Um, just trying to impart some. Maybe you hadn't thought about feeding your discus this way. If you don't like this, or you have better ideas, or have other ideas, please leave your comments, or send us an email at discusofthesouthwest@gmail.com. Or you can call me at 806-674-6509. I do look forward to hearing from people that are excited and love discus, because we all do. Anyway, have a great day and enjoy your discus.